British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is rejecting calls to resign this morning. He has been fined, as we were first reporting to you yesterday, for breaking his own government's lockdown rules in connection with Partygate. Johnson, the very first British Prime Minister ever sanctioned for breaking the law. He has been fined £50, about $100, and that has people reacting.
Yeah, it's not only breaking the law, it's lies, hypocrisy, and it's just the latest in the series of things that we've been seeing over the last few years of Boris Johnson. So yeah, it's not too soon for him to be asked to resign.
People have an obligation, if they're going to sit in positions of power, authority, to play by the rules.
They are guilty for breaking the law and they should pay the penalty, which is basically they should resign from Parliament.
There you go, some initial reaction from people in London to word of the sanction and the fine. Pretty paltry sum, Ellen Morrow. Tell us more about the latest on the British Prime Minister and the reaction to all of this.
Well, Heather, you mentioned the cost of this fine, £50, about $100. That's nothing to Boris Johnson in terms of money, but it is a stain on his reputation for sure. The first sitting British Prime Minister publicly known to have broken the law while in office. And not just any law. These were laws that were put in place by his own government to keep the British public safe at a moment of crisis. You know, Boris Johnson would have gone on TV explaining to people why they couldn't gather, why they couldn't be together, why these laws were necessary, and then he broke these rules himself. The London Metropolitan Police are investigating 12 gatherings, some of them boozy affairs in Downing Street for leaving parties, for example. Boris Johnson was known to have attended several of these gatherings. He's not the only person to have been hit with a fine over this. At least 50 fines were issued, including to Chancellor Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson's wife. Sunak also says he is not going to resign. Now, the fine for Johnson relates to a surprise birthday party that was held for him in June 2020. And here's what Johnson said about that event yesterday.
In all frankness, at that time, it did not occur to me that this might have been a breach of the rules. But of course, the police have found otherwise, and I fully respect the outcome of their investigation.
And part of the problem here, Heather, is that Boris Johnson not only broke these rules, there's also been a shifting response from Downing Street throughout this crisis. Back late last year when the scandal first broke, Boris Johnson denied that any wrongdoing had occurred. And then there were weeks and weeks of bad headlines, weeks of pressure, and eventually he apologized. This whole episode has really angered a lot of people here in the UK, particularly people who lost loved ones in the pandemic and weren't able to mourn them, weren't able to be there with their family to hold a funeral, weren't even able, in some cases, to see their loved ones in their dying days. Here's one of those people, Lindsay Jackson. I spoke to her last night, and her mother, Sylvia, died in the first wave of the pandemic in the spring of 2020.
I've been a fool for not breaking the rules myself and for not going and saying, to hell with you, Boris Johnson. I'm going to be with my mother when she needs me. Treating us for fools, taking us for fools. We deserve better than this.
A lot of emotion, a lot of anger over this matter for the Prime Minister, but he's going to pay that £50. He has apologized and appears to be moving on. I don't know whether we'll hear from him in Prime Minister's questions today, whether there will be any further reaction, but where, if anywhere, do things go from here on this, Ellen?
Well, when this scandal was really at its height, late last year and early this year, there were loud calls for Boris Johnson to resign. Some of those calls were coming from his own Conservative Party. And that's really the key here, Heather. If Johnson's party stays on side, then he stays in office. And of course, the big change in context here is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. One Conservative MP who earlier this year wanted Johnson to go said yesterday that now is not the time to unseat him. So Boris Johnson almost certainly to survive this latest episode. One question, though, is that there are local elections coming up in the UK in May. Will Tory candidates pay a price for this Partygate scandal? In that vote, we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you, Ellen Morrow from London.